My name is Faheem Ahamed. I'm the Group CMO for G42. I have the privilege of being part of this journey of advancing AI for the last 5 years. And it's truly been a privilege to kind of experience it from the kitchen sink. We're here to explore topics like large language models and agentic AI that are delivering both economic and social impact. And this hits really close to home for me and for G42. It's not just a professional interest for me, it's a mission. In my previous life, I spent about 15 years on social impact in one of the most challenging parts of the world. But today we can do so much more with the advancements of AI. So whether it's through advancing healthcare, transforming education, or creating new possibilities in the creative industry, these technologies aren't just tools, they're forces of change, and the change is imminent. But while we do this, we also have to do it equitably and ethically, which is kind of the grounding framework of how we need to move forward collectively. So we've got a fascinating panel today, quite diverse, and we'd like to keep it action-oriented. So please join me to welcome first Rodney Zemmel. He's the Global Head of Digital and AI at McKinsey. Rodney's expertise in driving digital transformation has helped countless organizations to modernize their operation and embrace AI's true potential. And he's got some great things to add. Next, most of you might know as a Grammy Award-winning celebrity, extremely creative. But I've known him for the last 2-3 years and understood so much more on where his heart and mind is at with the use of technology and what that can do for cultural change, social impact, and also in the creative space. Please give a big round of welcome to will.i.am. The next one doesn't follow the glamour, but he's got a fascinating IQ and does some phenomenal work. This is my colleague, Dr. Andrew Jackson. He's the acting CEO of Inception and also leading the Responsible AI Institute that we partnered with Microsoft to build in Abu Dhabi for the Global South. And he'll also be heading all our efforts on AI for Good from Abu Dhabi and UAE. Andy and his team has been working on equitable AI for quite some time. They were the lead to cut the frame bias of English as a language on the internet. So they created the world's largest Arabic LLM called Jess. Following that, they created Nanda to include Hindi and the Indian audience. And now they're working on other languages like Kazakh, Swahili, Bahasa, and others. And if that project kind of takes steam and we do this in the next 2 to 3 years, we would have native AI prospects of about 3 billion people who could partake in this evolution with all things AI. I'd also like to invite my fellow colleague from the UAE, Dena Almansoori, Group Chief AI and Data Officer at Aidan. We're very proud to have her as a woman, an engineer, who's kind of been there and leading it right from the front. Yes, we should be proud because there is a frame bias. Look at this room. We need to acknowledge it and we need to give them the flow. So everything that Dena's been doing has direct impact in about 38 countries, a lot of them emerging. So what she does is very, very important, and she's got some interesting things to share and probably deliberate. And finally, we're lucky to have Aidan Gomez, the co-founder and CEO of Cohere. Aidan's contribution to the field of AI goes far beyond entrepreneurship. He's also co-authored the landmark paper, Attention is All You Need. If you guys haven't read it, you all must. Uh, he introduces the concept of transformer architect, which is quite central to everything that we will be discussing. His work continues to shape how businesses adopt and benefit from AI. So thank you to the panel, and thank you all for making the time to be here for the very cool Andy Jackson, not so much for will.i.am. So we've got a few questions. Since this is all about acting on AI, let's get straight into it, and I'm going to kind of flip the question set as well to make it interesting. Each one of you come from quite a diverse background, adding to this conversation. So if you can introduce yourself, tell us what's really driving you on all things AI and what are the key challenges that you feel, but keep it rapid fire, short, so we can then get into deliberation. So with that, can I ask you to kind of go for the first one?
Sure. So I'm Rodney Zemmel. I'm all about helping businesses and organizations get real value from AI and get out of pilot purgatory. And what's firing me up? I think this is the most interesting business and science problem of the last 10 years. It's not a new topic. It's been around for 70 years, but it's exploded in the last 2. And I think this is what we're going to be doing for the rest of our careers. So if you're at Davos 10 years from now, this main street is still going to be all AI.
Well,
will.i.am. I'm excited about what people aren't seeing in the intersection of information, entertainment, and expressiveness. The AIs are not up to this point. we aim to create expressive, informative, entertaining experiences, and found a very awesome niche in cabin, in cars, and televisions, in a natural, human way, and the way you receive it is the most expressive and explosive as far as the color of how the AIs come to life.
see, that's a space that most people say we're not there yet because first it's going to be in the more substantive stuff, in finance and health, in infra. But creative is something that people kind of say, oh, we're kind of safe from AI. But I'd really like you to shed some light into how you want to kind of do that as we get into this conversation.
Okay.
Andy?
Hi, Andy Jackson. I guess I'm really excited by kind of going into the opportunity of Global South and bringing AI into a kind of and making it a less of a polarized world and making it more equitable. I think there's a huge business opportunity in this, as well as a social opportunity. So this is what keeps me going, building these models, doing these things. We do everything from climate to investment to energy stuff. But obviously the cultural and language piece is very important to us as well. So we're doing everything from genomics to, we're just doing a very wide set of things, which is sometimes daunting, but at the same time, highly impactful. So thanks very much.
Dena?
Hi, everyone. Dena, Almansoori. Happy to be here. So for me, very similar to Andy, I think it's the opportunities that we look at. And it's not just AI, it's the tech convergence of what we see coming through of AI mixed with IoT, robotics, quantum, 5G, 6G, all of that, and how these technologies are going to converge and we can leverage it for healthcare, education, energy, life sciences, drug discovery, and all of these other areas. So that's what I'm most excited for.
Awesome. Aidan?
I'm Aidan Gomez. I'm one of the co-founders of Cohere, and we're very focused on putting this technology to work. So I come from a research background. I think the thing we're most excited about is seeing this start to percolate into the economy and drive productivity. Very focused on privacy and letting enterprises touch as much data as possible with this tech and integrating it into the different pieces of software that today humans use to get their job done so that we can start to shift the boring stuff that humans don't want to do onto this tech.
Aidan, do you want to kind of expand on that and kind of share a few use cases, if you may, kind of on the digital interaction, right? How can AI enhance personalization, which is something you've been focusing on, and while doing that, the balancing act on kind of ethics, data privacy, and so on. Yeah?
Yeah, totally. So the last year was a big shift in the market. The maturity of enterprises in their thinking about AI has ramped up massively. Before, folks would show up to us and say, what's this LLM thing? Can you help us think through it? And it was a brand new tech that was exciting and that their kids were using, et cetera. Now they're showing up and saying, I have this production use case. Let's go to production. But they still have blockers to achieving value. I think chief among those is privacy. So if you think about it, you want these models to drive productivity and do automation. To do that, it has to know about your company and the specific context that your company operates. So it has to access your data. And the most valuable data is the most sensitive. And so privacy, if you don't have that, you can't actually automate all the things you want to because the models can't access that data or can't access those systems. So privacy is the first one. The second major piece is actually just an integration project. If you want these models to create that value, they have to be able to use your software, your SaaS, your ERP, your CRM, your HR. If it doesn't have access to the system your humans do, it can't actually take that work off of their shoulders and deliver the productivity and value creation. So we're very focused on shortening that process, making it super easy to just plug in all the apps that your humans use and all the data that they have access to, and then start offloading onto the models.
Thank you for that. Dena, if you can talk about how the hard infrastructure from telecoms to the digital infrastructure, how that is kind of building out and how is that empowering industries, economies across various markets from kind of developed to emerging, and what's the kind of impact that you're seeing? And if you could have some use cases that you could share, that would be great.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and Andy and I share that passion as well. And we've teamed up on some pretty exciting projects, particularly in the African market. And so, for us, spanning across the 38 countries, we've pledged $6 billion to making sure that we support these nations in building AI-grade infrastructure. So you're talking about ultra-high bandwidth, low latency. We're looking at GPUs and making sure that we really support these nations to scale in the way they need to scale. The countries in which we operate, apart from Egypt, Morocco, the obvious ones, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mauritania, Mali, et cetera. So I think for us, it's fundamental when we think about it. We look at the entire tech stack and we go down to the infrastructure layer and we start there to make sure that foundational element is there, which includes reliable connectivity as well.
Great. And while we're doing all of that, Andy, do you want to kind of shed some light on the whole notion of responsible AI and what needs to happen kind of at an organization level, at an enterprise level, and then how that kind of percolates into both the development of AI and also the use of it?
Yeah, it's a really hot topic. People talk about it very vaguely, but I try and make it very concrete because it starts off with building models, and building models is all about data, right? So making sure you have the right data sets is what I'm really passionate about, and trying to find data, create data. I've been working on data most of my life, and data is always terrible. It's always dirty. It's terrible. Has bias. So fixing data is like 90% of my job. Finding data is the other, part of my job. And there's like 1%, which is building models. So it's getting people, and the data is a source of power. Breaking those power struggles is like another part of my job. So really kind of liberating data into models is the big piece. So responsible AI starts with data, and then kind of continues with people, because we expect models to kind of behave responsibly. But if you don't put the right things in, the right things don't come out. So I think there's an awareness piece. People are not really aware of what models can and could do. I mean, we're very heavily working on safety around models and making sure our models cannot act badly, in terms of being used for cyber warfare, chemical warfare, anything like this. We're very conscious of this. But there's also a cultural aspect that we work on, which is also making sure that our models, we actually put bias into our models, cultural biases. So if we have a model that's built for the Arab countries, there's obviously a bias towards a certain culture. And the same for our Hindi model. Again, we actually purposefully put bias in towards safety and into their culture, right? So it's culturally safe as well as being safe across multiple different dimensions. So I think this is super important. And then as we look at industries, we build industry-specific models for energy, for investment, for genomics. And again, we have to be very conscious about what safety means in those contexts. So I think it's, responsible AI is one of these topics which is very broadly spoken about, but the reality of it is it's super detailed, and the devil's always in the detail. So like, what is responsible AI for genomics, right? When you have people's genetic makeup, this can be completely used in a great way, but it can be completely abused in a terrible way as well. So we like anything, if you think safety first and you act with that in mind when you're building these things, but also as you're consuming them, right? That you understand that the models are built for a certain purpose. Because I think sometimes people think models can do everything, and they can't. They're built by humans. Humans make mistakes. They're built and they're governed by humans. Governance is, as we said, not representative of all people. And most of the development of this is done at polarized places in the US, in China, and we're representing other people who want to do other things and want to represent other things. So,
which is just another 8 billion people.
it's a small matter of 8 billion people.
Yeah.
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 So I think that this is where we come from a responsible AI with this vision first.
I think with that, Will, you're doing what you're doing and coming from an artist, a creator, and embracing technology to kind of take that to the next level. But more importantly, your vision has always been to empower and get more creativity out there from the young lads across the world. Do you want to kind of give us your worldview and sense of where you're coming at from the whole notion of culture with the advancements of AI and how that can pretty much empower young talent?
Well, when you have success in one field, especially in the world of music, companies call you to help sell their products. So we're often called to help sell somebody stuff or help get somebody elected. And a lot of times, like, people show up. We showed up when humans do bad things to one another. Like, we write songs about it. And then you have success. And then when you're out there doing work because you care about the community, I think about the community I come from and the lack of funding for education, preparation. And I started seeing the decline of our industry. I started worrying about, like, how are kids going to get out of these predicaments if music isn't the path? Athletics will always be athletics, but music creativity is not as it was in the 80s and the 90s. And so I looked to going back to my neighborhood in 2008, and I started a college prep program, a robotics program, a computer science program, because my hunch was the world's going to get more and more technical. So let me prepare the kids for my community where the world's going. And that hunch turned out right. So I started with 65 students. Now we have over 15,000 students. We've sent kids to Dartmouth, to Brown, to Stanford. And now with this my new company, FYI.AI, deploying into Mercedes vehicles. The other day I was at home and we had this bug in our system. I'm like, yo, what's going on here? And he was like, oh, I'm fixing this bug. And I got real emotional because this kid was one of our students. And now they're there from my neighborhood. And I'm like, wow, look at this. This is freaking amazing. Who would have thought somebody from the projects, 2 kids from the projects are working on an AI system that will be deployed in every Mercedes. And we're sitting there bugging it moments before we go to Germany on Wednesday. And so
that warrants a big applause for what he's doing.
So I think, we're living in an age where this AI will render a lot of jobs obsolete, but it's also going to create new industries.
Yeah.
And those new industries are going to come from what's part of the world.
It's good to know that superstars debug things as well.
Oh, yeah. I'm all about, I'm all about crushing bugs. Back in the projects, we were just crushing cockroaches. I'm used to that shit. So,
I think that segues well into kind of Rodney.
I'm waiting to hit I'm all about writing songs.
The role of collaboration, kind of between the advanced and the not, between nations, between infra, between public, private, all of that is required to kind of make this really work. And you have the privilege to advise a lot of these decision makers from investments to infra to end application. Could you kind of give perspective from your lens of where we are at and what needs?
Sure. So I'll talk about collaboration, but maybe before I do, I think if you're in this room, you're interested in creativity. So I'm going to add one or two more words on the
Please.
creativity topic as well. Generative AI is an amazing creativity technology in two ways. First of all, 2 years ago, people were saying, oh, this thing is just a parrot, right? It's fancy autocomplete and so on. If you look at what the new models are doing, the level of creativity that's coming out of it, the extent to which it can pass most tests humans can set up to say whether something is creative, the extent to which it can generate short stories that human judges will judge as being more interesting and more creative than human-generated ones, is incredible and will continue. Now, it might not end up doing sort of true breakthrough sort of capital C creativity, but for a level of creativity that most of us use in our daily lives, it can do it amazingly well. And not only that, there's one of my colleagues, Alex Dubrovsky, has a great phrase, says 80% of what most of us do is mediocre, right? Most of us are mediocre 80% of the time. If you think about how these tools can get rid of, can automate, can take away all that mundane stuff and let you spend your time on the 20% of things that actually is more human and more exciting, that's what's so fascinating about this new set of technologies that Aidan and others have enabled over the last few years. So from there to collaboration, the hardest part of the collaboration in all of this is actually between business and technology. And when we look at companies who are flying in this and companies who are stuck in pilot mode, the ones who are stuck in pilot mode have a great idea and then kick it over to their technology team to go build it. And their technology team will often kick it over to an outsourced vendor to go build it. And that's just a mess, right? You actually need business leaders who can co-own and co-create with the technology leaders. And we have a very strong point of view, which I think is amazingly reflected in this panel, actually, that right now we talk about business leaders and tech leaders. In the future, every business leader is going to need to be a tech leader, right? We'll still have tech experts, but if anyone wants to be a business leader in the future, they also need to be a tech leader.
So Rodney, with that, the other kind of dimension to this is everything that's going to happen is not just incremental. It's disruptive. There's quantum leaps, which is going to redefine how we have existed over the last 100 years. So historically, large populations provided workforce. But today, a small nation with agentic AI and robotics can perhaps have a very strong manufacturing base. And then that kind of reshapes the whole balance of things. So I've just used that as an example, but could you kind of elaborate on that and what are the other big trends that you and McKinsey are looking at that we need to be mindful of while we advance this technology?
So I think what's behind your question, there's going to be the potential for massive changes in the workforce. Now, for the last 100 years, technology has always created more jobs than it destroyed, right? I grew up in Manchester in the UK, and before the Industrial Revolution, that was 50% agricultural, what jobs people had. Within a generation, that had dropped to 1% agricultural, and the number of people employed had grown massively, like through technology. That's been the story for the last 150 years. Generative AI in the near term will continue that story, right? And all the places where people are worried about, is there going to be job displacement and so on, in the near term, there are so many places, in particular in the Western world, which is probably the bias of my experience set, where there are just such labor shortages. It's actually going to help people grow and help people get around the labor shortages that exist today. There's no question in the medium term, there are things that humans do today that are not going to be as valuable tomorrow because the machines can do them. And there are opportunities, as you say, for small countries, small companies that are labor constrained, right? Six brilliant people with great technology will be able to do what 1,600 people with more average skill sets can do today. I think there's a massive opportunity actually to stop the outsourcing trend, maybe even a re-onshoring or companies taking ownership of their own capabilities, and really thinking about super-powered small teams of knowledge workers who can do fabulous things. In the near term, there'll still be lots of sort of net new creation that will allow that will create more job opportunities. In the longer term, how that will play out, nobody knows. And it's a good topic for Davos speculation, but I think there isn't real data on it.
Aidan, you want to weigh in and kind of give your perspective to it?
No, I was just going to say that I have very little to add beyond what Rodney said. I agree completely. I think technology has always created more opportunity, and I think certainly for the foreseeable future, humanity is so supply-side constrained, not demand-side. In particular, this tech, I think to a lot of people's surprise, if you look over the past 15 years, its point of lever, it wasn't actually robotics or places that would impact low-skill jobs. Instead, it turns out it works on intellectual labor, and that was the first thing that we cracked, these LLMs. And that's the place where it's scarce. The reason intellectual labor is so expensive and so high value is because there's not enough of it in the world. And so I don't see jobs being massively impacted in a negative way. I think we'll spend a lot more time on the stuff that we want to spend time on. So yeah, that's how I really agree with what Rodney.
There's a great quote, there's a great quote from Gary Kasparov, if anyone's a chess player, right? So he famously lost to an IBM chess computer in the late 90s.
Yep.
And he gave an interview last year where he said, I was the first knowledge worker to lose my job to a machine. Now it's coming for all of you.
We have a link to that story because the whole genesis of G42 came exactly from our chairman, who also was amazed with the whole notion of losing to a machine and wanted to know what AI is and what it can do.
Didn't know that.
Well, what are the kind of key things that you need to make this into a global mission, a movement of sorts, where what you've started can have the contagion and we can have more of what you're doing around the world? What does the world need to do, and what do you need from all of us in this room to do to help you?
On a philanthropic side, or
Philanthropic, and also on the tech and the adoption. And in that, also protecting the IP and creativity of artists, which is so important.
what we've been able to do is, I'm surprised that it's not just in the education system baked. If you think of like every junior high school or high school, there's a basketball court and a football field. And two companies benefit from that. It's the NFL and the NBA. And they're teaching these kids these skill sets that one day they're going to play for this professional league. But not everyone's going to go pro.
Yeah.
But in every single junior high school and high school, there isn't like, a computer science program. And Jensen's theory is that you don't need to learn computer science anymore, like an AI can code. But maybe in the future you want to know the architecture behind it.
Yeah.
Just to rely on the machine for the machine. Like, we understand Mother Nature. We don't just rely on fucking rain. Like, you guys could, you can make it rain, right? Not that kind of rain. Yeah. We understand the principles of these things. So to take us away from understanding these principles, I think is inhumane. And so to demand that our kids be prepared for this tomorrow, and around the corner, things that we can do now, especially with this deployment in vehicles, there's millions of cars on the road every single day. And, we work to have vehicles, whether you're in an Uber or a robo-taxi or a car that you own. These devices are pretty dumb. If you think about, like, in the cabin, they still have radio. And so what we were able to do is like, hey, let's reimagine radio so that everyone can create a station. Because if you think of the FM, AM station that's in every single car, there's a limited bandwidth. The spectrum is limited. There's 88 to 108. There's no station after that. And so we created this new type of AI radio that allows people to create stations. And to create stations, you want to create hosts and agents and personas. And so that's a market on top of a market. And then we have this like transactional ad unit to where when you're listening to an ad, you could transact from it. All in the in the cabin, which is pretty remarkable. What's coming, what we've been able to imagine with these LLMs and ASRs and TTSs and stitched them all together to make what we have called a product. And you'll see that in March. And that will open up a whole new like, hey, what do you do, Robert? Ah, man, I'm the guy that made this host. Wait, shut up. You made that host? Yeah, it took me like, been working on it for 4 months. I got 10 million people that engage. We aggregate about 2 billion hours a year of people that engage and converse with my host. And so that type of marketplace for persona makers, agent makers, station makers is yeah, that means inner cities, like inner city, the creative community. We are the reason why like Adidas is Adidas, Nike's Nike, Apple's Apple. Like they aim their products through that funnel to then go out and hit the whole world. Sure. It's about time that that community is doing it from the community side. Yep.
That's awesome. I can see and feel the room. Andy, if you could talk about kind of the other dimension that we're all kind of walking into is with the advancements of AI and agentic AI, right? We're going to have work colleagues who are AI agents, and we need to coexist as a community within the organization. Perhaps that's how it'll be as we engage externally with brands and products. How do you kind of see it from somebody who's working at the back end?
Yeah.
And the challenges that we might have to look to coexist, because so far in the evolution of humans, we've always tried to communicate with each other, and now we have kind of a new being that we need to communicate, because that being will also influence what we're thinking, feeling, and believing.
That's a tough question. So I think the agentic kind of framework is just one of a series of steps that's going to happen in the next couple of years. And I guess from a business perspective, because we work very much on the business side of things or the enterprise side of things, what we're already kind of doing is kind of in some way bringing in optimizations or kind of speed ups or assistance, which kind of help in how you do things now. But I'm really interested in how AI is going to come back, and you know, we see planning, you know, through agentic systems. But I think that really needs to change how we do things rather than just speed up what we currently do. Because I certainly do things badly every day. I mean, I've got 80% mediocrity for sure, you know. I would say it's probably more 90% mediocrity, to be honest, in what I do every day. And I'd like to really rethink and rethink how businesses do things, how I do things every day myself, you know. And I think, you know, rethinking radio, I think there's so much more to rethink, and having more people think about this. But I think when AI starts coming in, and we get to that AGI, we get to that ASI, and it starts rethinking what we do, I think that's where it gets really interesting. So it's kind of hard to really pinpoint what that's going to look like, but we're doing it now. I mean, in our kind of engagements that we're doing now, we're definitely trying to rethink how oil and gas is discovered, right? We're trying to rethink, how do we think about like investments for some of our clients? Like, how should they rethink what their process looks like? Because it's, you know, it's a process that was there because they didn't have these tools, because they didn't have these technologies. So this kind of optimization of what you do now and just kind of speed up an investment process isn't really, you know, that cool. What's really cool is putting all that data in and rethinking, is this the right way to think about this? Is this the right way to think? Am I doing the right thing? So that's really what I'm aiming for myself.
Well, there's a very good use case of a fairly large pharma company that I can't name, but they did a social experiment and created a small bot for their human HR function. And the pilot kind of expanded, and now it's catering to about 5,000 people within the organization. And guess what? This bot is the most trusted person in the HR team for that organization, because the perception of the employees of that organization is that this bot does not have gender bias, race bias, it's not eating into kind of your managerial stuff. And the company has now, for the last 2 years, measuring its direct impact on business. The number of ideas that have come out have just quadrupled. The reward system of who's initiating, who's delivering, is going directly to the benefactor and not right on top. So it's quite interesting, kind of, if you just imagine that within human capital, it is the bot that is the most trusted. So while we talk about AI frame biases, we also need to remind ourselves that we have our own innate human frame biases that have led to the world in which we live. We've got wars happening. We're pretty much destroying our mother planet. So it's important for us to reflect on that while we also look at AI. Dena, what are the kind of challenges that you're facing and you anticipate as you take it across, wide markets of the world, large populations, and what needs doing, and how can kind of this community get onto that bandwagon to kind of make that movement going?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I mean, there's several challenges I think we see. One of the big ones that I'm really focusing on at the moment is on the inclusion side. And I think that's why it's so important when we talk about LLMs, for example. We have team members like Andy and the team building an Arabic LLM, Jace, and really scaling that across. From an LLM perspective, a lot of the data and content online is used to train those LLMs. It's public content. 2/3 of all the content online is in English. And 20% of the world speaks English. So you've got 80% who speak the 7,000 other languages.
Yes.
And so as we build technology, we don't want to create further digital divides. We don't want to create further economic, social disparity as well. So it's very important that as we build these, we have those languages. We make sure that we embed the cultural nuances, the dialects into these LLMs as well. So we've teamed up with 4 other incredible telcos recently to form the AI Telco Alliance. That's Aidan plus Deutsche Telekom, South Korea Telecom, Singtel, and SoftBank, to build telco-specific LLM that is trained to support the communities in which we serve. So we spend a lot of time training it on the cultural nuances, on the languages, to make sure that we don't create that further gap as well. So the inclusivity part, I think, is very important.
That's brilliant. So, Aidan, communication, how important is that? And the element of trust. If you could kind of expand on that from the adoption side.
As a barrier to adoption, I think trust is a big one. It's really nice to hear that example around the HR use case and it being the most trusted place for employees to go to ask questions or ideate with that team. That's really impressive. And I think the same thing is starting to happen in the customer support side. These language models are so compelling. There's no wait time to access them, and their NPS scores are massively exceeding humans. And so I think we're seeing some big shifts across the space, but it all relies on trust and familiarity with the adoption. We're seeing inside of enterprises, and I'm sure Rodney can attest to this, the folks coming out of school who are using these models on their homework and that type of thing, working with the model regularly, they adopt instantly. They find productive places to plug it in and rely on it almost overnight. Changing others' patterns is a much slower pace, and especially because they're nervous about leaking data onto a consumer service, which is an extremely high risk for the enterprise. So getting companies to think about setting up a truly secure interface for those employees to access has been a big one. The other piece is just on the technology front, opening up the different applications it can pursue. There's been a bunch of progress over the past 3 years, but one of the ones I'm really excited about is reasoning. This is something it's so obvious. We should have had it right from the get-go. Like if you think about the current status quo of these models, the input space is all of language. It's every problem. And the output space is you need to respond immediately with the correct answer. That's the user expectation. And so for 1 + 1 and prove, Fermat's last theorem, it's the same amount of energy that goes into those two problems. And it makes no sense. We should be able to put different levels of energy into different complexities of problem. And so reasoning is a real breakthrough, and not just for like math and coding and these sorts of elements, but for agentic use cases, where really like even the smartest human, if you handed them one of these problems, they'll probably fail on the first try. Right? Like even an expert will fail on the first try. The expectation is the first attempt is failure, but that actually helps you steer towards the correct answer. That's more information for you to solve the overall problem. And so these reasoning models will just unlock agentic behavior. There's one that hasn't really emerged in the popular discourse yet. It hasn't been productionized yet, but it's key to personalization, and it's continual learning or learning from experience. We might spend hundreds of millions of dollars building a model, and at the end of that process, it's fixed, it's frozen, that's it. We put it into production, it's talking to all these people, but it's not learning from them. It's spending years working with these people, not learning from them. And so there will be a new capability that emerges, maybe not this year, maybe in 2026, where these models can grow over time with you. And as you interact with the model, it'll make mistakes, but you'll correct it, and it will learn, and it will never make that mistake again. And so you'll be building your own model. And so you think about that from the enterprise perspective, becomes a core piece of your IP. This model is so, so valuable to you. It knows all of your employees, their context, it knows your business. As soon as we have these two parts, really interesting applications.
That's very well framed, very well framed. Usually in a panel like this, you also kind of try and see and give a dimension on what are the negatives of AI. I want to avoid doing that because there's enough and more happening in Davos this year. But what I'd ask Rodney to talk about is, what is the cost of not adopting AI? Because that's an interesting lens to kind of look through. And what does that mean for nations and organizations?
So I'll illustrate that with a story that I think ties onto Aidan's point about who are the rapid adopters and who are the more conservative ones. So there was an experiment towards the end of last year with doctors, where there was a setup to see if generative models help doctors make better diagnostic decisions. So the setup was there was a group of patients who came in, the doctors had to try to diagnose them. And how well did they do? And the doctors, unaided, were about 70% accurate in terms of diagnosing people, right? Which they thought was pretty good and is generally what you get in primary care. Most people are surprised the number's that low, but that's the reality. They then gave doctors access to one of the models. I forget whose model it was. They ran this for a few weeks. They come back, they tested it again. 74% accurate. The doctor's like, oh, this is good. It helps. It's a useful tool. It'll make us better. We're happy with this. What they didn't tell the doctors was they were also testing just the model, no doctor.
Right.
90-something% accurate. So the involvement of the doctors was making the models worse, right? Because they were second guessing it, right? They were not trusting it. They thought they were smarter. And sometimes I'm sure they were right, but obviously in many cases they weren't. So that's an adoption challenge, right? And that's a risk. So that a risk of not adopting is we'll be stuck with more of the 80% mediocre, right? That's what it means at an individual level. At a company level, it's very interesting. I feel like last year's Davos, everybody was, the foot full on the accelerator on AI. This is going to change the world. Go, go, go. This year, as you walk along the promenade, everybody's like, oh, now's the time to get impact at scale. This is hard, lots of pilots and so on. And as you speak to chief executives, we were just chatting about this in the green room. As you speak to chief executives, there are some who are saying, well, I'm not sure yet. Maybe it's overhyped. It's a fad and so on. Listen, of course it's hyped, right? The tech industry is the best hype, the second best hype machine on the planet. But the value is real. And there's bifurcation between the companies who have learned how to really drive adoption of it at scale versus the ones who are still stuck in pilot mode is enormous. And there's a real risk for companies who don't get out of that pilot mode and for individuals. Look, I don't know if AI is going to replace the jobs of marketing managers. But if you're a marketing manager who uses AI, you will replace a marketing manager who doesn't use AI.
Yeah. My hope is that I just give all this up and then get into farming or something, or create a channel.
In farming, you'd be surprised.
Will, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to share? And I'd also like to get your perspective of how much do we have to unlearn to learn anew coming from a creative person? Because that's something that we're all indoctrinated into, especially people who come from the field of science and tech. And it would be good to get from your perspective.
I don't know if unlearning is the right way, but you just have to hyperize your curiosity. You have to dimensionalize your curiosity in this new realm. So bring all the things that you've learned, but then at the same time, like expand your curiosity, challenge it, compete. When I say compete, like engage with these platforms to then look at the world to go out there and solve the unsolved problems with it. There's so many problems that are unsolved, and I can't wait for folks in Watts to solve the problems themselves with these tools. The folks in, Mangueira and the favelas in Brazil, provinces in the Philippines, townships in Jamaica, like go out there and solve these problems. There's a question I want to ask. Hey, I'm here at Davos, and we're on the stage, and it's a pretty awesome conversation that we're having. I want you to say what you represent, why you represent it, and in this agentic world that we're facing, right around the corner, what are the dangers if people from inner cities, if they don't have access to technology like yourself? I say yourself as if you're something, like, you know what I'm talking about. But if they don't have access to this, what I'm talking to, and if and when they have access to it, what are the dangers if the agents don't sound or reflect and meet them where they are and how they are? Hopefully I have service. Can you turn my mic on?
Look, child, you hitting them deep questions, huh? Let me break it down. In this big old world of tech, if folks from the inner city don't get a slice, that technology pie, it's like playing chess with a missing piece. You can't win if the board ain't set right. The dangers, man, it's like being on a street corner where the lights don't reach. You can't see what's coming at you, and you ain't even getting a chance to dodge it. If the technology ain't accessible, then folks miss out on education opportunities, and that bread, money moves. And if those tech agents, those voices don't look and sound like them, it's like a concert where they ain't playing your jam. There's no connection, no vibe. It's crucial for inner city folks to see themselves in tech, to know that they got a seat at the table. It's about representation and empowerment. So they ain't just trapped in a cycle, but cracking that cycle wide open. So here's the deal. Tech should be reflecting the real, embracing every shade, accent, and dream, from them streets to them tall towers of innovation. That's how we would turn talk into action. You feel me?
And so when I remember I was in Miami. It was 2023, and I'm like, called my co-founder. I'm like, yo, I need you to give me the ability to build the agent how I see it, like with expression. And I was up for like a day and a half, and I'm like, holy shit, look at this, look at how expressive it is. And then that took me to like building ones that are like multilingual, speaking all languages from Arabic to Hindi, Korean to Chinese, and could understand with ASR what you're saying in multilingual. So like you can speak in Spanish and English and it'll understand it, like and banter with you and debate, but meet you where you are. And so we can't wait for folks to build agents with us. going to Ghana, going to these areas like, hey, you want to build agents? Going to Brazil, you want to build an agent? Come on, build it with us. And we have a really, really awesome tool for folks to that agent stuff is like, right now, I remember last year I was like, yo, Aidan, look. And Aidan gave us some tips. This guy's awesome.
He is. He is. Yeah.
I swear to you, because, to be a part of the paper crew, that paper, attention is everything.
Yeah.
Attention is everything. And the attention you gave me was everything.
Oh, dude,
Awesome.
thanks so much.
Awesome. We could go on forever with a panel like this.
Okay, we're doing a selfie.
But really, thank you very much for being here, for feeling it, and I hope you guys take a little bit from what we spoke and apply it into your real lives. We'll be around to answer questions, have any conversations. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to the panel.
Give me one.